have taught this class twice, so my experience is limited that way. When they first come to take this class, they usually think that this class is about, it's very charitable in nature, you know. In this class, we're going to talk a lot about how can we save the refugee. It's again, back to square one. But very early on, second or third day, they realize, oh no, it's about what am I not doing. So it's more about the non-refugee than the refugee community, and how we are not doing enough, or we are somehow unconsciously doing something to not make that communication possible. So the first week, it's disappointment, anxiety, anger even, I will say, right? And then once things get stabilized and we start talking about issues, I think, I mean, the evaluations are great if that's any marker of how this course is. And I have to say, I have not had even one student drop out after the first class. Wow. They stick around, maybe they're angry, you know, they want to figure it out. And when they go out, I think they're pretty satisfied, but also a little depressed, you know. More conscious, I would say.
More conscious? Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like a really great perspective to come from with that. To give us a better understanding, what would you define as a refugee?
You know, the term refugee already is so loaded, and unfortunately with negative stereotype. And I say that because refugee today has become, the word itself has become an object, a commodity in the market, right? We do not think of a refugee as a human. So, or we don't tend to think that the refugee has a voice, it has an agency or a consciousness, right? The only thing that comes to our mind is a refugee is a hapless victim. We don't think that a refugee is a victim of a political crisis that any one of us can face any day, right? And I can give you an example why I don't want to define a refugee. I mean, I don't have to, it's already defined. What I do in my class is deconstruct it, break that. You know, like I once met somebody who was a professor of anthropology in Baghdad University, and he's a dishwasher here. Right? Oh, wow. And people don't think of that. And one of the constructs of a refugee very quickly, you know, and I don't want to simplify this, but I'll still go ahead and say that in our society here, we tend to think of a refugee in the same way that we think of a homeless person, right? Like a homelandless person. Although we know today, and we should be aware that even a homeless person, I mean, it's a very common rhetoric that you're homeless because of bad choices that you made in life. It's really not that, especially after the economic depression that we've been through. So somehow, again, unconsciously, we start making that allusion, right? You're a refugee. Somehow you are culpable in the situation that you are in. So when you are given refuge in another country, yes, it's a very good thing, you know, but also you have to somehow be very subjugated, very submissive, and, you know, so you have to fit into that image of the refugee as a victim. The moment you start speaking, you become a threat. And what I mean is, in today's world, you see, right, refugee and terrorism. So either you're a victim or you're a threat. So in my class, what we do is try to stop doing those broad assumptions, victim and terrorist. Where do we come? A middle path, so to say. So
thank you so much for giving us that insight into that. That's some great points to think about. A common question people have when it comes to refugees is the expense. And do they actually cost us money as taxpayers?
No, not at all, they don't. And I can give you a few examples here. So the first thing, right, when they come in, it's true they don't have a lot of money, they don't bring money. They cannot bring money. So what happens is, you know, whichever agency is directing them or they come through, they are given 3 months worth of money to sustain themselves. Now what that money is, it's actually a credit that is given to you because we live in a credit society. Right? So you need to have a credit card. So if you're in this country, and I came to this country 12 years ago as a graduate student, and I very quickly learned that if you don't have a credit card, you're really, I mean, you're nothing, right? It's like identityless. So you're craving for that credit card. So you can imagine for a refugee that becomes a huge, you know, thing to achieve. But what that 3 months of money is actually the credit, and you have to pay it back. you are paying it back, and the refugees, they do pay it back with interest. It's not that. The second thing is, as I said, a professor of anthropology in Baghdad is a dishwasher here in one restaurant. Can you imagine the skilled labor that you're getting, right? Education, what we get, many of the refugees come from countries where education is not as expensive. Socialist countries. So they're most often than not, they have graduate degree, postgraduate degree. So what you're getting also is highly qualified people to work. You're getting skilled laborers as well. And for countries, in Europe especially, like Germany, they actually need people to come because their workforce, right, 25 to 45, in a span of 10 years, they won't have that. They're losing their population. So they actually welcome refugees because they need that. So they're adding to the labor force. And it happens everywhere. The other thing is they're also cheap labor in this country too, because you don't validate the degree that they have, right? They're engineers, doctors, teachers, but the United States does not recognize that. So you like it or not, yes, many of them work with very low wages here. Somebody with double masters from Nepal is a janitor in a strip mall here, and I know him. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You kind of went into some of the ways that refugees benefit our country. Can you go into some of the other ways that they benefit us?
I mean, the other great thing is the multiculturalism that they bring in, right? Language, food, culture. This is what makes a nation great, right? I mean, in today's world of globalization, we are trying to break boundaries all the time, at least theoretically, that's what we are saying, and it's a good thing to have that kind of exposure. Any country who's had that has had a very bright future. I think for the generation now, it's extremely important. For us too, it's very, very important. We see that. It gives you that global perspective. It opens up. So you don't have to necessarily, going abroad, study abroad is fantastic. I'm not saying you don't, but you don't have to actually go somewhere to seek it out. It's there, it's here, right? So I think from a social point of view, from a cultural point of view, it's fantastic having people from all over. So the cultural point has to be taken into, and it's not a small point. It's not a small issue. It's a big one.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Since you teach so much about refugees, what previous experience or knowledge do you have that helped you start helping the refugee community in this way?
So when I was doing my MPhil in Women's Studies in India, I got this job with UNIFEM. And I also got involved in a project with UNICEF on the issue of anti-human trafficking for prostitution. So I was traveling a lot for that, Bangladesh, Nepal, Thailand. And when I was in Nepal, so this issue is, human trafficking, and, so who are the girls, young girls who are being trafficked? And I went to Nepal, and I was in a refugee camp. And I learned many girls in the refugee camp are also easy targets. They're vulnerable to this kind of trafficking. And one thing led to the other, and I speak Nepali because my father's hometown is foothills of Himalayas. So I just speak Nepali. I just picked it up. So that helped in conversation, and I learned so much, and that was really my first time. So I was actually meeting the Bhutanese refugees in Nepal. So that was my entry into it. Very brief. I worked on the issue of anti-human trafficking for 2 years, and then I came to do grad studies here. Obviously, I always wanted to get back to these issues. I wanted to, but I was pursuing my academics, job, everything. So when I came to Boise, I saw the opportunity. I jumped at it, and also, I have to say, I didn't really do it consciously. Like, I was not looking to do it, right? But I bumped into people, and they said, okay, this and that. And as I said, fall of 2014, I was sensing this need to have a conversation. I teach courses like gender biopower and biopolitics, right? On war, post-colonial literature. These are issues that come all the time. So it's not a first time I'm having a conversation. My students actually in these classes, I've got the sense, right? I do global literature. I got the sense that they needed, they wanted it. And then I thought, why not write a proposal? So this was offered through ISLE, the Intensive Semester Learning Experience, a course, because there was a big budget involved in it. We also had a fun social experiment in the form of a workshop, quilting workshop. Yes. So you know, as I said, this was about communication or the lack of it between the two communities. And as part of the ISLE course, we had to show different teaching methodology, right? How are you teaching one issue from different perspective? So one was definitely the in-class teaching, discussion, learning, whatnot. And